All right, so here we are with the second half of our lecture on slavery, and here we're going to kind of go away from the United States and talk about slavery and kind of the rest of the world. So it was outlawed in Britain in 1807, which is after we had our Revolutionary War. Of course, the United States was a separate country. Um, but it ended in Britain in 1807, but still survived in a lot of British colonies and areas for a long time after that. But the reason it started becoming kind of outlawed in Britain and other European areas around this, early 19th century kind of time frame, was very much due to the kind of Enlightenment thinkers, right? We've talked about a lot of these guys before. The Enlightenment, the 16, 17, 1800s, that entire kind of thought process about rights and duties and humanity and all of that really argues against keeping other human beings as slaves at whatever level you're talking about, but especially chattel slavery. And it was also had a lot to do with the Quakers. Okay, the Quakers were a huge religious group at the time. They're still around today if you want to look up the Quakers. But they were started by this guy who was one of the first Quaker religious people. And this religious movement at this time was very kind of anti-slavery, pro-abolition, use the Bible to justify treating all humans well, not use the Bible to justify treating people as slaves, because, that's bad. So the Enlightenment thinkers and the Quakers had this huge effect on how slavery was viewed by Europeans at the time, especially in England, Britain. In 1926, the League of Nations passed an international kind of a treaty or a convention that outlawed slavery. But of course, the League of Nations went defunct not too long after. So in the United Nations, obviously the Universal Declaration of Human Rights said slavery is bad. But as we talked about before, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it doesn't actually have the force of law behind it. It wasn't until 1998 that the UN passed a thing with the force of law behind it that made slavery illegal via international law. And essentially it says, slavery is a crime against humanity. If you commit slavery or try to support slavery, that's a crime against humanity, and you can be arrested and pulled before the International Criminal Court if you do it, okay? But that doesn't mean there's not slavery in the world today. There's lots and lots and lots of slavery in the world, mostly the third world, but also in the first world, right? Even industrialized nations still have slavery to this day. Most of the slavery today is debt bondage or contract slavery, i.e., you owe money to this group, and thus you're going to have to give your labor to pay off the debt or finish this contract or whatever. But there's also other kinds of slavery, right? There's still war slavery, i.e., Group A conquers Group B in a war, and then enslaves some or all of Group B to serve Group A in multiple different ways. And then there's religious slavery in a lot of parts of the world where, a family will give a daughter or a young girl to a religious leader as in repayment for sin, essentially. So these religions get co-opted by these people who get these slaves through this religious belief, right? But this guy Bales, he comes along and he's really studying slavery and what causes it and what kind of conditions need for it to arise in the modern day. And he says there's kind of three steps, right? The first is a population explosion, i.e. there are more people than there are jobs, right? There's lots and lots and lots and lots of people. Then there's the globalization of capital, i.e. money becomes very easy to shift around. Products, my cell phone, right? I bought it in the United States, but it's got electronic chips made in China from materials mined in Africa, and it uses data on networks in Europe, and I mean it's modern day products are really these globally produced things, um, because it's so easy to transport both money and materials and infrastructure around the world. um, this has allowed um, slavery to exist kind of with at many places along that chain underground, right? Um, but then the third requirement is corruption. Because slavery is outlawed via international law, I'm not aware of any national governments that say slavery is legal. So you need a national government or a regional government to kind of look the other way, right? And usually they look the other way for money, for kickbacks, payments from the slavers. But what we have today a lot is this slavery that's kind of out of sight of the end user, right? So one of the things they're talking about in the modern day is slavery in growing and harvesting chocolate, right? So I go to the store and I pick up a chocolate bar and I eat it, and I'm not thinking about how that was produced. And in reality, the reason I can buy a giant chocolate bar for 99 cents at the gas station is because the people who are growing and harvesting these chocolate crops aren't paid for their work, or they're in some kind of debt bondage, or they're in some other kind of slavery, and that makes the chocolate incredibly cheap. And I don't see that as a consumer. I just buy the chocolate bar and enjoy my chocolate. So because of this globalization of production, we can have slavery without people, without the end consumer, or the people, the normal people, the working class of industrialized nations, ever having to really see it or experience it or understand it. Does that make sense? So how do different philosophies and theorists kind of look at slavery and what it is, and essentially how can we say that it's bad, right? So Marx, we're going to kind of go over the three that we've been kind of focusing on this entire course are, Marx, Weber, and the liberals. So Marx essentially just looks at slavery as like an early mode of production, right? There's slavery and capitalism and feudalism and all these things Marx sees as these early modes of production. Because remember, he brings basically everything back to economics, right? But he sees capitalism, i.e. the quest for wealth, especially monetary wealth, but also land wealth and things like that, not just as an economic system, but also as a culture, right? So this desire for wealth, this desire for things, because there's this uneven distribution of resources, slavery comes in, and the people who have exploit the people who have not to make that uneven distribution of resource even more uneven. But Marx saw the end of slavery in the United States as inevitable because it was no longer profitable, right? So Weber comes in and says it's not the economic that drives the cultural, it's the cultural that drives the economic, right? So with Weber, it's less about the economics. The ultimate justification for slavery was less about the economic benefits of it, although there certainly were economic benefits for slavery, especially in the early days. He saw it more as it's about the assertion of power. It's about power relationships and culture, and how one person can completely control another, and that is a social and cultural drive. The economic benefits were just kind of a side thing, but he saw it also as kind of a step towards industrialization, right? So industrialization makes slavery less important or less overt. So you have this power dynamic exercised through slavery. There's the accumulation of wealth, the development of industrialization, and then all these former slave owners get to say, oh, we don't need slavery anymore. Oh, we apologize. We'll, give you rights now. Whereas that's just kind of excuse to, because they don't need it anymore. It's not that they've learned better. It's not that they now know that slavery was wrong. It's that they don't need it anymore because the economic system has evolved past the point where slavery is really needed. And then, of course, the liberals, Smith, Locke, Mill, those guys. For them, slavery was really, according to the liberal mindset, the liberal viewpoint, and again, I'm not using the word liberal as in modern liberalism. I'm using this in the kind of classic, pre-19th century, pre-20th century kind of way. It was all about life, liberty, and property. And slavery really violated all three of those, right? The right to life for the slave, the right to liberty to the slave, and the right to property for the slave. So that's kind of how they were able to, modern liberals say slavery is bad because it violates these life, liberty, and property beliefs, okay? But that's the end of our chapter on slavery. Thank you so much.